The site of perpetual warfare, Miller 13. From a platform where a border guard would stand, you could take in the constellation of small booths offering the surveillance industry's finest products a staggering multitude of ways to monitor, chase, capture, or even kill people. A border between the United States and Mexico was a site of constant war-like danger. The U.S. borderlands are today ground zero for the spread of domestic surveillance state. The Border Security, Economic Opportunity, and Immigration Modernization Act, McCain said, will be the most militarized border since the fall of the Berlin Wall. Calling this immigration reform is like calling the NSA's expanding global surveillance system a domestic telecommunications upgrade. It's really all about the country that the United States is becoming, one of the police and the police. It represents the most intense concentration of surveillance state in a single location ever witnessed, a place where the Constitution has an asterisk, which means that anything goes, and dystopian worlds of all sorts can be invented. Next, militarized surveillance leads to a significant number of deaths on the border. Johnson 07. A week rarely goes by without the press reports of undocumented Mexican immigrants who have died on the treacherous journey to the U.S. Many migrants die in the desert seeking to make a better life. The vast majority of the border crossings in no way can be characterized as dangerous to the national security or public safety of the nation. Military-style operations on the border have channeled immigrants into remote, desolate locations where thousands have died, agonizing deaths from heat, cold, and dehydration. Operation Gatekeeper demonstrates the U.S. government's callous indifference to the human suffering caused by its aggressive border enforcement policy. The tragedy of Operation Gatekeeper is a direct link to the rise in deaths among border crossers. Mark Carr at Border Crossers. Next, surveillance also leads to sexual violence and labor exploitation. Migrants have depended on smugglers for passage into the U.S. Heightened immigration restrictions and enforcement have caused increase in the fees charged by smugglers. Some migrants lack the cash to travel to pay for the trip. Many are forced to become indebted to their smugglers. Smuggling debts have been paid through forced labor, thus taking the exploitation of undocumented workers to frightening levels. Failure to work off the debts may result in brutal consequences. Passage among the many risks is the possibility of being abandoned, asphyxiation, heat exposure, and dehydration. Criminal syndicates thrive in the trafficking of human beings. Some undocumented immigrants have been enslaved. Reports of slavery have increased dramatically in the past few years. Victims labored in several economic sectors, including prostitution and sex services, domestic service, mail order brides, sweatshops, agriculture. Their captors often subject them to beatings, threats, and other forms of physical and psychological abuse. They are terrified of their captors, but also fear law enforcement. Next, curtailing surveillance is key. It's the linchpin of border militarization. Call Han 14. Surveillance functions identification, screening, and authorization, mobility tracking and control, and information sharing play crucial roles in immigration control processes. Control activities engage in extensive collection, storage, analysis, and dissemination of personal information in order to identify individuals, screen them, and authorize their activities, enable monitoring and control over their travel and share of information with other actors. These surveillance technologies and processes are remaking the nature of immigration governance. The plan: the United States federal government should substantially curtail its surveillance of the United States-Mexico border. Next, easier immigration solves a myriad of problems: deaths, racism, technological competitiveness, and national security. Johnson 07. The presence of undocumented immigrants in the United States is a plain reality that needs to be addressed. Open borders will provide a pragmatic, long-term solution to this nation's undocumented immigrant and related immigration problems. Border control simply wastes billions of dollars and result in thousands of deaths that have not ended and cannot end unlawful immigration. The assimilation of Latina or Latinos can be also seen in their increasing political importance. Politicians across the political spectrum, including President Bush, increasingly and aggressively court the Latinos/Latino vote. Mainstream politicians often take care to avoid taking positions on immigration and related issues that would tend to alienate their growing segment of the electorate. Since then, most mainstream Republican politicians have studiously avoided taking positions that can be characterized as anti-immigrant or anti-Latina/Latino. Not surprisingly, given the growing Latina/Latino population, Latina and Latinos in recent years have greatly increased their representation in elected offices, which demonstrates their increasing integration into U.S. social life. The law should be changed to create the legal presumption that a non-citizen can enter the country unless it can be demonstrated that he or she will pose a danger to the national security and public safety. Next. Border surveillance has increased in the scope, and without major changes, it will be increasing for decades to come. Box 15. In July, DPS launched another surge called Operation Strong Safety. Operation is slated to continue into August 2015 at a cost of more than $2 million a week. Recently, Governor Greg Abbott had indicated that he would like to make the surge permanent by 2016. The state will have spent more than $1 billion on border security over the last decade and is poised to spend much more in the decade to go. Next, their surveillance is continually slows trade along the border. Yoruba 13. When it comes to the border, Congress wants to put a big red stoplight. Last year, Congress spent more on securing the border than it did on all federal law enforcement combined. The lockdown at the border chokes billions of dollars worth of legitimate traffic. Rivera said, before we used to cross in 5 minutes. Now it takes us about 3 hours. Some 5 million truckers per year are subject to costly delays as a result of rigorous security measures. These big lines have economic costs, billions of dollars a year lost growth for the United States and Mexico. Trade quintupled in the last 20 years. 6 million U.S. jobs depend on trade with Mexico. Next, a focus on security dilutes any funds meant for border infrastructure. The plan is a prerequisite to improving infrastructure meaningfully. Barry 11. Over the past decade, the U.S. government has focused on more hindering cross-border traffic with Mexico than facilitating the legal crossing of people and goods. Border crossings have been considered a threat can be considered more as a threat than a fundamental benefit to both nations. Most of this attention has been focused on northbound traffic. U.S.-Mexico trade constitutes a palpable national interest, nearly $400 billion annually within U.S. exports of $229 billion in 2010, much larger than $163 billion imports from Mexico. About 80% of the trade is carried by rail cars and trucks across land ports of entry. Mark card at entry. Yeah, so like, I'm open for crossing.
Okay.
Alright, who's got time for crossing?
I'll just do it.
Let me know when you're ready.
No, I'm starting to ask some questions.